Good morning and welcome back to Venture Daily.
On today's show, Trump just flipped the AI playbook, ditching regulation for raw acceleration with an ambitious plan to supercharge data centers, wipe legal barriers, and root out woke algorithms.
Chinese hackers recently breached the United States Nuclear Weapons Agency using a Microsoft SharePoint flaw, exposing how fragile America's cyber infrastructure still is.
And we talk about how Europe may be poised to have a Sputnik moment in AI, but to build unicorns, founders must win early in the US, where the money, market, and momentum live. I'm Josiah Simons.
I'm Jackson Fordyce. It's Friday, July 25th. Let's get you smarter before your first meeting. The White House just unveiled an aggressive new AI action plan, marking a major shift from caution to acceleration in U.S. tech policy.
That's right, the plan includes over 90 actions focused on building data centers, scaling AI infrastructure, and stripping away regulations that could slow innovation.
At the heart of the strategy is a push to outpace China in the global AI race by modernizing the electric grid, expanding semiconductor fabs, and promoting open source models. It also introduces new rules aimed at eliminating ideological bias in AI systems used by federal contractors.
Supporters call it a bold step toward technological leadership, while critics argue it's a gift to big tech that abandons necessary safeguards. Either way, the U.S. is officially going all in on AI.
And for more on this story, I talked to Sid Jayakumar.
Thanks, Jackson. Really happy to be here. I'm Sid Jayakumar, CEO and founder of Finster AI startup about 18 months old, working on automating workflows in financial services. Currently calling in from London. We're split between London and New York, and previously was at Google DeepMind for 7 years on the AI research and engineering side.
For my first question for Sid, I asked, what are the key goals of Trump's AI action plan, and why do you think AI infrastructure is so important to the White House?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by caveating that by saying, obviously, I'm not in the US, I'm not American. But I think that gives me an interesting view into it from sitting in the UK and from kind of looking in and, you know, in a sense, having, especially with Google, worked for very American companies, but often with a workforce that was very not American and very international. I think there is a clear understanding, you know, I think across a lot of Western countries and governments at the moment. I think, unfortunately, the EU here is probably the exception, but I think the UK is very aligned there on, from an application point of view, from a usage point of view, and from a kind of just global impact point of view, these models are essentially national security infrastructure in a sense, right? And I think one of the things that I really noticed kind of reading the action plan is the emphasis on open weight and open source models. And I think that's interesting because what you're essentially saying is, you know, the plan talks about biology and drug discovery and defense and all of these use cases. But I think if you're a nation today, you sort of have this question of if the underpinnings of our defense system are going to be autonomous in many ways, and the underpinnings of a lot of just capitalism and capitalist machinery and how industries work is going to be automated, where is that sort of value chain and supply chain ending up, right? And if a lot of that value concentrates in model providers and infrastructure providers who live outside your country, then I think there's a very real argument that can be made. I'm not saying everybody would make it, but there's a very real argument that can be made that you are essentially giving away the secret sauce, and you are highly, highly dependent. In the same way, there is this sort of energy dependence that Russia, Ukraine really put in the spotlight for Europe. You don't want to be in that scenario with AI dependence, right? You want to say if everything goes to shit, in a sense, we are self-sufficient when it comes to what is needed to run the sort of nation's machinery, and AI is going to be a really big part of that. So I think in many ways that is an obvious reason to think very clearly about the use of AI. I think there's two sides to that. It's how do you get the most out of it, and then there is the other side, which often is focused more on Europe, of how do you build safeguards around it. But I think it's two sides of the same question.
For my next question for Sid, I asked, David Sachs says that the AI action plan will help ensure the U.S. leads in international AI diplomacy. What do you think leading in AI diplomacy will look like?
What I find interesting about that is if you look at kind of a lot of the big scientific advancements that came out of say, World War II, right? And you look at what the treaties around nuclear weapons were. And I'm not saying they're the same thing, but those were in many ways state-sponsored projects, right? The internet. And then you could have states take a view on it. What's interesting here is that a lot of these frontier models are owned by private companies. In a sense, there's a reading of this that says the US government is saying, hey, if you're an American company that is building these things, you need to kind of abide by our principles of what our diplomatic relations look like, right? As opposed to maybe the slightly more, hey, this has actually been built by an international coalition of people and there's research papers coming in from here and from there and this belongs to the world. I think, if some of the forecasts on how AI will impact the world, defense, drug discovery, the GDP in the long run are true, then it is very much a thing where every country in the world will want access to models that are in some way, shape, or form hosted in America. And that gives you a bargaining chip that you didn't have with, say, cloud. Nobody went and said, if you want an American cloud provider, you're going to have to do these things. But they are doing that with AI. And I think from a kind of real diplomatic power point of view, that, there is some sense to that.
For my last question for Sid, Trump unveiled the plan and signed executive orders during a keynote at Wednesday's AI Summit in D.C., co-hosted by the Hill and Valley Forum and the All In Podcast. What role will the All In Podcast and David Sachs play in shaping or promoting the AI action plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun podcast to listen to sometimes. It's an infuriating podcast sometimes to listen to. But we all do, and it's definitely very influential, for lack of a better word. I don't know, I couldn't really comment on what role it will play, but I think, this probably plays into the larger conversation that's quite active in tech and Silicon Valley of kind of, in a way, there used to be this joke about kind of Goldman having a pipeline from Goldman to the White House that's very much becoming kind of Silicon Valley to the White House, right? And I think that question will be in rooms far bigger than this being played out right now of how much you need to play ball with politics and with policy going forwards.
Thank you to Sid Jayakumar for joining the show today.
All right, Jackson, what do we have next?
Yes.
Or actually, we have next me telling you to please like this video. If you're enjoying what you're watching so far, we got a lot more coming your way. But please like this video, subscribe to our channel. We got every single day, Monday through Friday, the best tech stories coming right at you, and you don't want to miss it.
With some of the best guests in the game.
That's right. All right, what's next?
Yep, for our next story, the U.S. agency in charge of nuclear weapons, the National Nuclear Security Administration, was breached in a cyber attack targeting Microsoft SharePoint software.
Yeah, the hack attributed to Chinese state-sponsored groups exploited a zero-day vulnerability affecting on-premise systems, not Microsoft's cloud. Officials say no classified data was compromised and only a small number of systems were impacted.
The breach is a part of a broader campaign that is at multiple U.S. agencies, foreign governments, and state institutions. Microsoft identified Chinese-backed hacking groups Linden Typhoon, Violet Typhoon, and Storm 2603 as responsible.
That's right. The incident underscores persistent vulnerabilities in government software and rising geopolitical tensions in cyberspace.
And for a deeper dive into the story, I spoke with Max Buchan.
So my name is Max Buchan. I'm based in sunny London, as you can probably tell from the accent. So I started a company called Valarian, and we are essentially, we're building a dual-purpose company here, bit more skewed toward defense right now. We're getting a lot of the traction in that space. We essentially build digital infrastructure, so virtualized enclaves to ring fence where data sits, how it's kept, where it can be, so how it exfiltrates from its environment, etc. There are obviously lots of use cases. One is compartmentalizing how LLMs are run, for instance, running private RAGs. One is locking down privileged communication. So we're doing a lot of stuff, and that's everything from enterprise right down to, frankly, running Accra, our platform, in a Pelican case on a battlefield. So we're kind of covering the spectrum, but yeah, hailing out of the UK here, and my COO and co-founder Josh, based in Wyoming. So he was out of the Army Rangers and 12 years at Palantir. So he sits the other side of the fence.
Back-to-back Brits.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of the Europe episode here. We've got two Brits, and then the third story, which we'll get to in a moment, is all about Europe.
And he just moved from London back to SF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. My first question for Max. The NNSA, the agency behind our nuclear arsenal, was breached through a SharePoint zero-day. Even if no classified data was stolen, what does this say about the fragility of our most sensitive digital infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a great question, mate. And I actually spent a lot of my time thinking about this separately to this news story. And I think the immediate answer, I think, is the reliance on third-party software, right? Which is really coming to the limelight. I think your dependency variables, your dependency risk, when it comes down to third parties, is always heightening the risk. Now, that is exponentially increased when we talk about, especially non-US countries, right? Based companies and countries. For instance, I spent a lot of time in the UK talking about this, is our dependency on third-party software, frankly, that lives in another country as well. which magnifies the risk of centralizing risk in a third-party private company, let alone when it's not in the sovereign territory that you're in. So I think for me, it comes back down to how do we think about regaining sovereign control of our own softwares that we're using day to day, both in the country we live in and also if we are using third parties abroad.
I also asked Max, Microsoft says Chinese state-sponsored groups exploited the vulnerability. Are we entering a new phase of cyber warfare where even document management tools become national security targets?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's an argument to be had that we've actually been in this for a long time, right? It's now it's coming to, some would say fruition, some would say just it's coming to media attention, right? I mean, firstly, absolutely, yes, you're right. And I think, I call them honeypots. You've got these large centralized repositories of information, right? So if you're a foreign malign actor, you've mentioned one, and I think it's probably the best example. Why would you attack one place or one institution when you could attack one third party and get the information of thousands of companies or institutions in one, right? It just like from statistical point of view, it's probably going to be higher value for the kind of resources you're going to put to that. So obviously, we think about that a lot in terms of those honeypot attacks. And then for me, like obviously over here in the UK, it's also kind of from a NATO perspective, with the kind of changing geopolitical framework, obviously the new US administration's relationship with NATO and how us in Europe are having to stand on our own 2 feet for the first time in a really long time. It's also nice to be having these conversations back here in Europe again. And so I think reducing those dependency variables, more distributed systems, all that good stuff, I think is the way we're going to get ourselves out of this mess.
I also asked Max, this comes on the heels of the SolarWinds breach and other major hacks. Why do you think US agencies are still struggling to defend against known software supply chain threats?
Again, another really rich question. I think it's because they're so deeply entrenched, right? We're kind of trying to deconstruct a multi-decade build of, as you rightly summarized it, right? This is a digital supply chain, right? And so how do you kind of, when I talk about sovereignty as well, I'm not necessarily talking it from the nationalist lens of we're Brits or we're French or whoever it is and keeping our data there. It's also institutional sovereignty, right? So how, you mentioned the NSA example, how does the NSA keep their own sovereign data separate to any other agency or leakage into any other military domain within the DoD, for instance, like coming out of the IC into the DoD? So that kind of data slippage, data leakage is also something that's really, really top of mind for a lot of the folks we talk about. So it's not just on a national level, it's really on a kind of granular institutional level, thinking about lateral agencies, compartmentalizing how your data is stored, and then obviously reducing the decades-old dependency on third party. It's obviously not a quick solve, but it's just, I think the positive thing for me is it's really in discourse now. Like it really feels like we're thinking about this much deeper than we ever have done.
To close it out with Max, is this a wake-up call for government agencies and enterprises to fully move off self-hosted legacy systems?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it has to be in many cases. I mean, it's so highly publicized whenever this stuff comes out. But I think also as someone sitting outside the US right now, and obviously we operate a lot in the US, we have a company there, my co-founder's there, and we have a team there. But as someone running a British topco, as a non-US company, we're also looking at this saying it's also a big risk factor for, British government data staying on third-party systems in another country, which puts another factor of dependency risk right on top of that cake that we're talking about. And so, these kind of layers and the kind of exponential problem solving becomes trickier. But yeah, big wake up call, I think. And just the fact that we're having these conversations now is really, really positive, and we've seen it come in public discourse. I think hopefully it makes action just come even quicker.
Thank you to Max for being on the show today.
All right, last story, Jackson. What do we got?
Yep, last story for today. A report out of Hoxton Ventures argues that Europe has the opportunity to generate a Sputnik moment in artificial intelligence, recalling that pivotal moment from 1957 when the Soviet Union shocked the US.
Yeah, the continent boasts top academic institutions, global AI talent, and a growing cohort of high-value startups. However, despite this intellectual capital and technological promise, Europe continues to lag behind the United States in commercial outcomes by a factor of more than 4-to-1 when looking at unicorns created since 2016. So right here, you got United States. We have 656 unicorns.
Let's go.
5 top countries here. China's got 168, India 71, United Kingdom 53, Germany 30. I think France was around 20 something. Europe is 4-to-1.
Wow.
The
Right.
U.S. is favored 4-1 to all of Europe.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
The key to closing this gap, according to the Hoxton report, lies in European AI startups aggressively expanding into the U.S. early, where markets, capital, and exit opportunities are far, far greater.
Yeah, so if you look at this graph here, so startups relocating to the U.S. from Israel were 9 times more likely to become unicorns. That was between 97 and 2021. India, 6.5 times more likely. The United Kingdom, 2.5 times more likely. Netherlands, 2, and France, 1.3 times more likely. Founders who move to the U.S. secure American customers, raise U.S. venture capital, and plan exits that are significantly more likely to build multi-billion-dollar companies.
The U.S. offers deeper capital markets, higher startup valuations, and stronger M&A activity, factors that drive asymmetric returns for founders who choose to scale there.
Yeah, so the message is clear. To turn Europe's AI potential into global success, startups must build in Europe, scale in America.
For more on this story, I spoke with one of Hoxton's own, Payton Dobbs.
Excited to be here. My name's Payton Dobbs, Hoxton Ventures, and I'm a partner.
For my first question for Payton, I asked, the paper argues that Europe has the research pedigree and talent, but still lags 4-1 behind the U.S. in unicorn creation. What do you think is structurally holding European AI startups back from scaling like their American counterparts?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, it's not talent. Let's say that much. Europe has the talent. And especially as it relates to AI now, we would argue Europe may not just even be at parity, but may even be more advanced when it comes to AI talent. And obviously that's front and center of everyone's mind right now. But when you look at Google's kind of AI HQ or their acquisition of DeepMind based in London, Meta's FAIR team is based out of Paris with Jan LeCun. Apple's AI has an AI center in Zurich. And then if you look at a lot of that original OpenAI founding team, a lot of them hail from Eastern Europe and across the continent. So Europe has the talent. Let's start with that. Historically, commercialization has been where there's no debate that the US is just the largest addressable market. If you look even just US household consumption, that's nearly double. The US is nearly double what EU is, and actually almost 3 times what China is. So there's just a bigger uniform market out of the US. Yes, Europe is a big market, but as we know, it's very fragmented. Now, again, all of this is changing, and there's some newer reports that start to show that trend is shifting that I can talk to. But the macro point here is the commercial opportunity exists in the US, the funding exists in the US, and exit opportunities in the US. So when you stack all that together, you have commercialization, funding, and exits all in one place. It's just a massive opportunity that you can't miss and can't dismiss.
Right. And for my next question for Payton, I ask, one of the recommendations is for founders to move to the U.S. as early as financially and personally feasible. Do you agree with that advice? And what are the trade-offs you've experienced or seen?
So first off, yes, I do agree with it. And secondly, I would be remiss not to say it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And it's why I put that caveat around when it's financially viable and personally viable. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Particularly today's environment and what the current state of play is. But just being on the ground, not just for talent, but for market opportunity, for sales prospects, for competitive intelligence and understanding what others are doing, it's a great place to start. Now, there's better economics, particularly when it comes to people and human capital out of Europe and great tech talent, like we said. So it's a mix. And of course, it's very industry specific and case specific, right? It depends what kind of business you're looking to build, what industries you're going after, and at what stage. Yeah, we say as early as possible because there's a lot of benefits on all those reasons I mentioned about being here on the ground. But of course, wouldn't want to throw anyone into it when they're not financially prepared or personally prepared as well.
I feel like it's a blessing that we live here in the United States and we don't even have to worry about the fact that, hey, if you want to start a company and you want to become a unicorn someday, you probably should move yourself and your family and your entire company to the United States.
Your whole life. Yeah, we are lucky to be here. We don't have to go anywhere else.
Right.
Right. The paper mentions that 80% of Hoxton's portfolio companies generate U.S. revenue, and many report over 50% of their revenue coming from the U.S. And so I asked Payton, what's your strategy for breaking into the U.S. market, and what's been most surprising about selling there?
Yeah, I often say, so I'm going to say incubate in Europe, export to the addressable market of the US. So I would say it doesn't make sense if you haven't at least built an initial product and haven't reached an initial product market fit. But once you start to see that viability, you have a working prototype, you're starting to see those green shoots of market viability, then there's no reason not to go after the biggest market that exists in the US. If not, when you look at long-term venture outcomes, you often are compromised as a result. And in many cases, that US competitor ends up acquiring or winning the bigger opportunity. We learned that firsthand. We had a great outcome with Deliveroo, a unicorn out of Europe, went public. It was actually founded around the same time as DoorDash here in the US. They have very different outcomes as a result. When you look at market cap today and kind of what that looks like, you have Deliveroo trading around $3.5 billion and DoorDash is over $90 billion. So it's a massive outcome in terms of a difference in outcome determined on whether you win in Europe or win in the US.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's crazy. The report says that European companies consistently get lower multiples even at IPO.
Yeah, so if you look at the valuation premiums here, US companies consistently trade at around 40% higher multiples than European peers.
Yeah, so I asked Payton, do you think more European AI startups should list in the US, and what needs to change to make that more common?
So, hey, we were the biggest advocates and originators of putting encouraging and putting some of our early wins on the LSE and listing in Europe. And there's a national pride to that as well. We had Deliveroo and Darktrace both listed on the LSE, both unicorns, both public. And in fact, more recently, Thoma Bravo acquired Darktrace with the sole reason to take private and relist in the US. If you look at ARM, what SoftBank did with ARM, they saw just alone from taking off the LSE, relisting in the US. When ARM was taken off, it was valued at 24.5 billion sterling, which was about $32 billion at the time. When it was listed on the NASDAQ 2023, it was valued at 65 billion. And today it's almost 150 billion. So there's clearly a disparity. When you look at revenue at multiples, valuations, et cetera, there's a clear delta. In terms of what needs to change, we need, again, more liquidity in Europe. We need more of an appetite to invest in technology and higher growth and more business-friendly regulatory and policy environment. All of this is changing. It's just been slow. And we very much want to help carry that torch. We're starting to see those green shoots. If you look just at data that was actually just published this week from Deal Room, unicorns that were built over the past year, there have been 84 so far in 2025. 52 of them were in the US. So 62% were US, 38% was non-US, 17 of those were in Europe. So 20% have been in Europe. If you look historically, EST Global did a study of companies 5 billion plus valuations from 2012 to 2024. In there were 116 companies, 14 were in Europe, so only 12%. So if you take the past 10 years, basically, 12% of unicorns 5 billion plus were from Europe. The past literally just 6 months, it's almost 20% in Europe, coming out of Europe. It's a big improvement. Things are definitely heading in the right direction. We want to help support that as well as facilitate this US addressable market opportunity.
Dude, just imagine how many unicorns would exist if there were no cafe breaks, getting a cigarette, having an espresso outside. They'd have 1 trillion unicorns at this point.
A glass of olive oil. All right, interesting stuff. So according to the report, if you're a European founder, you can increase your chances of delivering venture scale outcomes by considering 5 key steps to success. Here's the key steps. Number 1, moving to the US as early as possible, once financially and personally feasible, of course. Number 2, tailoring product for the market. Number 3, building early commercial traction with local reference customers. 4, raising money from a US venture firm. And then finally 5, listing in the US or building relationships with potential suitors well ahead of exit.
It's a cheat code for European startups.
Yeah, here you go. Here it is, right on the Venture Daily podcast.
Thank you to Payton Dobbs for being on the show today.
Okay, that's it for today of Venture Daily. Thank you so much for joining us. If you made it this far, comment down below that you made it this far. We know it was a long episode today, but we had a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and thank you to Content Stack for letting us film here every single day in Austin, Texas. If you like today's show, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or X, leave us a like, a comment, and a review. Throw us a 5-star rating if you think we earned it. And as always, we'll see you Monday morning here at Venture Daily.